Okay. Now, I mentioned that I've described the pelvic motion, which can start at the start of the downswing, or you could even start rotating your pelvis while your club is going down between P3 7.5 and the end backswing. And that's the concept of torso-pelvic separation. And the question is, how much should you have? In other words, how much should you turn your pelvis before you start to turn your shoulder? There's no fixed rule in terms of this, but what is the advantage of doing it? So I'm going to get Jim to stand over here, face that direction, and get you in backswing position. And I'm going to put my hand on his shoulder to say, don't move your shoulder, but square your pelvis like you do. And notice that the shoulder's still in the same position here, and he can rotate his, don't dip so much, just rotate it 50 degrees, yeah, just rotate it. Notice how he can square it, but his shoulder's not moving much forward, right? The arms are coming down into what's called the power package slotting, but the shoulder's not moving forward while the hips retain. Now, I have a huge physical disability in the sense that my spine is fused, so watch when I do that. In backswing position, he's going to put the hand there. Notice I've rotated my pelvis. Now, the moment I start to turn my pelvis, he can feel pressure on my hand, and notice that my shoulder goes forward. In other words, my thoracic spine is fused to my lumbar spine. It's just like a rigid rod. And the moment I turn my pelvis, I cannot generate any torso-pelvic separation. And that's a huge disadvantage in a golf swing. Because when you're in this position, if you start with a pelvic rotation like I described, and watch my shoulders moving, I'm coming over the top. There's no way that I can come from the inside. So I have a huge problem if I try to use the correct pelvic motion. So in my personal swing, I compensate by not moving my pelvis that actively, because if I do, I can't avoid coming over the top. But if you're young and flexible and do it correctly, you actually do want to keep your shoulders back, as you demonstrated, and turn the other way. And what's the advantage? So you turn the pelvis and keep your shoulder back, is that the hands can come from the inside here, not over the top and around like that. And that's a huge advantage. But if you have too much torso-pelvic separation, then the pelvis can outrace the upper body, and then what will happen? You'll be blocked. So turn your pelvis very assertively, right? It's already facing at 60 degrees open, and his shoulders are still back. Then his right elbow gets jammed over here, and he can't get past, and then you're jammed and stuck. So that's a problem that plagued Tiger Woods throughout his entire professional career. He had such an assertive pelvic rotary motion, plus he had an element of hip spinning, and the combination got his pelvis so far ahead of him. There's a video that he produced in the year 2000 when he was at the peak of his career with Butch Harmon on the Golf Channel, and he says, Ole, he did this, and he was stuck like this. He says, Ole, and I'm in a terrible position, and I have to flip to rescue it. And he said that even in his later career, he had this flipping problem sometimes because of an over-assertive pelvic rotation. So, torso-pelvic separation is good for the reasons I've given, but over-assertive or too much puts you at the risk of getting your pelvis so far ahead, you almost feel like the upper body's falling back, and you dip in your shoulder. You see the right shoulder is going down to the ground instead of where it should go, which I'll describe soon, which is down plane. Now, if you would go to your end backswing position with a golf club, iron. Now, notice that the power package is intact, which this is the loaded intact flying wedge on his selected plane. Right forearm flying wedge is supporting it on the plane. Now, as he starts the downswing, what's going to happen as the pelvis moves first, then the upper body moves. As the upper body rotates around your rightward tilted spine, the left shoulder socket moves towards the target. The movement of the left shoulder socket is what causes this to move down. But notice that the distance between the left hand and your shoulder socket stays the same. In other words, there is no attempt to move your arms independently at the start of the downswing. You almost feel like you're leaving the power package up there and you're starting the pelvis, but the power package gets pulled in synchrony with the pivot from P4 to P5. Now, from P5, what's happening is that the shoulder's starting to turn fast, but the arms are moving down fast, and the distance between the hands and the shoulder is increasing, right? And that represents, from the left arm's point of view, the release of what's called power accumulator number 4. That's Homer Kelly's concept, that the master power accumulator that produces most of the power is the left arm swinging away from its loaded position across the chest like that and elevated. So it moves in down towards abduction, and it also moves downwards towards the ground from an elevated position. And that you're using your shoulder girdle muscles here on the left. Gravity helps you to bring it down. And the other thing that helps it is your right arm must keep up with the left arm. So you have to adduct your arms. Now, there's a famous image of Ben Hogan, for his book, 5 Lessons, and there's a video that he did, and he says, he's at backswing, and then he says, he looks like this. And he says, from there to here, my arms get a free ride. He says, I don't feel like I'm pulling my arms down, and it just gets pulled down because of the pivot motion, and he looks like that. And of course, it's not the pelvic motion that pulls the arms, because the pelvis is not attached to your arms. It's the left shoulder that's moving. But he didn't mention this, but of course, if you're keeping your power package intact with a bent arm like that, you must be adapting your arm, right? So Jim does it very well. So if you go from P4 to P5, notice in the beginning that the hands are not far away from the shoulder. So if you look at his hand arc path, as it goes, the butt end, which is pointing to the ball target line, actually moves away from the target for a few inches before it moves down, moves this way. Not because he's pulling his arm away from the target. It's moving down because of the rotation around his rightward tilted spine to the motion. At this point, he's generating, the power accumulator number 4 starts to release. Now, notice that he's keeping the right arm down close to his side. And that feeling is as if you were skipping stones, you see. So you hear, notice this is a pitch motion. This is an overhand throw motion. But you could pitch underhand like that, or you could pitch sidearm. But whether you pitch sidearm or you pitch underhand, the feeling is the elbow leads the hands. So if your hand, in your right forearm flying wedge with your palm on the plane, comes down the plane, led by the elbow. So go back there and let's do a side view. I want you to go to show the left arm flying wedge with the left arm alone, going from P4 to P5.5. Notice in this time period, the hands go there. The distance between here goes, and it means that the left arm is separated from the chest. There. Notice that the whole intact flying wedge is coming down the inclined plane. So it was on the turn shoulder plane there. By the time he gets to waist level, it's down to his elbow plane. Now the right arm, at the same time, is supporting it on the plane with this motion, right? So you feel that the elbow leads your hands, right? Okay, see how he does that? and stop at 5.5. Look where he is in that position. And notice he's still got the bent arm. Now what happens if you didn't do that? If you didn't bring it and perform that motion, is, so you're pulling down with your left arm through the pivot action like this. If this didn't come down like this, your elbow is still up there, two things could happen. Your arm could straighten and push on the shaft like that, and you could have an early release of the club. And also it could push it outwards. It's not supporting it. So by actively adducting the right arm towards your side, from this position to side, with your elbow leading, notice how my forearm, right forearm, becomes more supinated, right? And you see, the reason why it's becoming more supinated is it's supporting the flying wedge on the plane, but the plane is shallowing out during your early mid downswing, and the palm must always remain parallel to the desired plane. So at this point, when you get to waist level, your right forearm is supinated and not pronated, right? And the amount of supination depends on the plane. So go to your end backswing and go with a club and go from P4 to P5.5. Notice that his club is shallowing out. It's out on the turn shoulder plane, and it seems to be dropping down. What causes the club to shallow out like that? What causes it to shallow out depends on how actively you adduct your arm. So if you make a motion really exaggerated, look how my palm, which is vertical there, goes to more horizontal. So it's that active adduction movement. Notice if you do that, the right elbow, go to your end backswing, is a little lower than this one. And the more you adduct it, the more it stays lower. And look at the club falling back, shallowing it. Now, when it shallows out, notice that the left forearm is on a shallower plane, which means that there's more pronation of the left forearm, and of course the right arm has to become, forearm has to be supinated, right? And so in other words, you're keeping the power package intact. The advantage of that is not only does it allow you to support the shallowing club shaft on the inclined plane, but it allows you to keep lag for longer. Because if you can keep your elbow head, notice how he keeps lag to all the way. Notice there's no release of the club at this point all the way to here. At this point, when he reaches here, the club will start to release. How that? Like this. It will start to release in the plane of the flying wedge. So what causes the club to release? And as the club releases, the right elbow has to straighten. Because if you try to hold it for too long, the club can't release, right? So the feeling is the right arm will start to straighten. So what causes to release? I meant to mention there are two sources of power in the golf swing. The one source is power accumulator number 4. These are concepts of the power accumulator. Loading and unloading comes from the golfing machine by Homer Kelly. And he said there's two sources of power in a swinger's action, left arm swinger. Is you swing in the left arm, which is you load power accumulator number 4 to end backswing there, and then you unload it. Then you notice that you have a cocked left wrist end backswing, and eventually after this releases, notice the club releases and catches up to your left arm. And this is called the release of power accumulator number 2. The uncocking of the left wrist, so that when you come into impact, the club is caught up to your left arm. And the question is, how do you do that? How do you achieve that goal of doing that? If you would hold that for me. I'm just going to get what's called the double pendulum. And this is just 2 paint sticks, which I bought from the Home Depot, and put a bolt through join the paint sticks there, and if you've got to get it loose enough. Notice that this would represent your left arm. And it's often called the central arm. This is the peripheral arm within the club shaft. So at your end backswing position, you have, say, a 90-degree angle between the two. Notice, if I just pull it to the ground, this and this hinge represents your left wrist. If the left wrist travels straight to the ground, the club still keeps the 90-degree angle. Now, if I turn it in a circular way, you see that release? In other words, what's causing this to release? See, it catches up to the central arm by impact. So what does that? Basically, is that when this is the hub path. The hub path is your left hand. Its path, if it travels in a straight line, say in your early downswing, it doesn't induce a club release phenomenon, but as you get close to waist level, you then start turning towards the target. And it's the shape of your hand-arm path that produces that tight turn that it causes the club to release. So if you would go to P4, so in the early downswing, go from P4 to P5. Notice that this is going down straight. So there's no force, because a club release phenomenon occurs because the center of gravity of your club is towards the end. It's somewhere about here. And if you pull it down, and this is the center of gravity of the entire club, where it's near the club head, it's traveling downwards, and there's no release phenomenon because they travel in the same direction. From this point, he's putting his hands to the target, right? The club head here, where the center of gravity is still going to the ground, and it still goes down, and it's the difference between your hand path and the center of gravity that causes the release. It's the change in hand path per unit time. So the more tight the turn, and it's the same feeling if you're driving in a car and you're going around a corner at 60 miles an hour and you're in the passenger seat, you feel, as the car goes quickly around the corner, you feel like you're getting flung towards the passenger door on the side because the car turns this way and there's a lag before you turn in the same direction. So there's this centrifugal force. So what causes this to catch up is that you call it a centrifugal force if it helps you to understand it, but it's really due to a very complicated mathematical equation called the D'Alembert principle that states that the club will release with a force in proportion to the change in the hand-arm path per unit time. So the club release, go back here, let's look at his hand-arm path. So his hands come down to P5, it's more straight. As he's getting to P4 and 5, you notice the butt end's pointing at the ball target line. No, look at the zone here. This zone in the mid downswing is where the club is, your hands are going towards the target now, right? And that, doing so, will induce the club to release. Now the timing of the release depends on a number of other factors. So for instance, if you can keep your elbow in the side and hold it back with a flying wedge, you hold it so it doesn't release as fast. Then you would have what we call a late random release here. If you're not so efficient with this right arm adduction maneuver, the side arm throw-in feeding, which supports the flying wedge, you might find that you start releasing here. And they're both acceptable. You can have an early random release or what's called a late random release. What is artificial is to try and keep it all the way to impact. So if you would come here and go through P6.5, keep in, see, don't let it release. You know, you see people who try to hold it like this and still keep 90 degrees, even though their hands have reached past the ball. You know, you should never have that feeling of, that's artificial, trying to hold there. You're not going to hit the ball further. In fact, you must let the release happen. Now, what how does it time? So do a left arm only swing, and you'll notice that his club automatically reaches in his just normal swing action. It releases and catches up to the left arm. If you swing with rhythm, you don't force it. Notice that there is no force other than this, what you can call it a centrifugal release, the law of the double pendulum. So the question then becomes, is it better to start pushing with your right hand on the club somewhere here to make it release faster? And I think that it's been shown that this is a disadvantage, because now if you're a swinger, you must feel it's a swinging motion, like Jim does so well. You just left arm alone. Now put your right arm on, but just support it in a way. He's supporting with the right arm flying wedge, but he's not adding any push action, right? And there are some golf instructors who say, let me do that when you get to about left arm parallel, P5, is that you then try to push on the shaft with your index finger of your right hand. Now, I'm going to show you some concept that you need to understand to do with a coupling point. I'm going to walk up to the camera here. Hopefully I can still stay in focus. Walk up slowly. To show you that when you hold the club like this, with the left hand, and your right hand sits on it like this, the right palm, the base of the right palm here, sits over your left thumb, like that. And that's called pressure point number 1. It's over the base of your hand. If you push on pressure point number 1, that's acceptable. Because notice what's happening is that I'm not causing the club to release. Any push pressure applied by the straightening right arm, if you straighten your right arm, pushes on pressure point number 1 over the left thumb, and it makes the club power accumulator number 4 release more efficiently, so that it helps to move the left arm forward. But it doesn't affect the shaft. However, there's another point where your right index finger, like the first interfalon joint, sits on the shaft, and if you press there, notice that it flips the club. So the point between your two hands is called the coupling point, which is just here, on the club opposite your index finger there. And if you apply a pressure below the coupling point, notice what it does. It flips. So if you have a nice release where it catches up to the left arm by impact, and you start to apply a force there, you're much more likely to apply too much force and you flip in before impact. So I think that you should do it, I think professional golfers do, and certainly you do, is you don't apply any force below the pressure coupling point with your right arm. You just use this principle of a centrifugal release action. Now, let's compare this club to this club. When you hit in a wedge, you can see it's much shorter, while the driver, being much longer, has a much bigger arc. So from here, it covers a much greater distance to get to impact. So to catch up to your left arm by impact, you need more club releasing power. So how do you do that? I mean, if the club is releasing simply due to the laws of physics, in other words, you're not causing it, you're not activating on the left side and uncocking action with your left wrist, and you're not pushing it with your right hand, how do you make it release faster with the driver? And the way it's done is through the phenomenon of shaping your hand-arc path. So let's look at your hand-arc path facing the camera. Hand backswing position. P4 to P5. His hand arc went down in this direction. P5 to P5.5 here. Notice that he's on plane, impact, flying, weight, pointing, ball forward. But in this zone, the butt end is pointing more downwards here. The longer you keep going down before it goes forward, down, as if you were aiming not at the ball, but let's say a foot behind the ball, from there, pointing, feeling like you pull in there, the more you can keep this for longer, and then when it releases with no more force. Now, if you did the opposite, let's say you imagined not pulling this down to there, but pulling it ahead of the ball, what would you do? You would pull it like that. If you pull it like that, your handoff path travels, look at this, instead of going like that, it moves too much forward, which means the shape of your handoff path has a long straight section and a more gradual curvature near impact. So that's very good for a wedge, right? So, in fact, that was a midline. So if you look at the length of a wedge, it's much shorter. So when he uses a wedge, he's going to use a different swing pattern. So, go to the backswing. Notice two phenomena causes the handoff path to change. When you hit in short irons, like 30, 40 yard shot, you don't need to generate much swing power. So the pelvic motion is not as I described, this rotating in a barrel, but you have a narrow stance and you could sway a bit. And notice when you sway, you pull in your hands to the target and you're not going down there, you're coming down there. So, and the feeling is you're aiming the butt end of the point, not at the point there, but somewhere there, right? Mm-hmm. And notice that this handoff path changed to that shape, and he'll square it, right? Do it and square it. He can square it easy because as you go to short irons, it's easier to square the face. So that's an important principle of how you use the shape of your handoff path through this aiming point technique to control its shape. So the more it goes down, before it goes forward, the more the shape looks like that. And if it goes straight to the ball from the top of your swing, then it's in this shape. It won't release with as much power. And you can use that. You don't have to think of it consciously, but that's the phenomenon of how golfers successfully get the release of power accumulator number 2 to occur with perfect timing for different clubs, which all have different lengths. Now let's go discuss another thing, which is the club shaft shallowing phenomenon. So let's take intermediate size club. Well, actually, let's do your driver. Now, end max swing position. Now, do your normal swing in slow motion. You could look how the club shaft is shallowing a bit. In other words, the hands come down a certain path. The club head is coming down a slightly shallower path. And what causes the club shaft to shallow out is that Jim tends to actively adduct it, like he's skipping stones, so actively that this right elbow really comes down like there. The more you have the feeling of it coming down there, the more the right elbow drops faster than the left elbow. And when this elbow drops, the whole power package turns so that it shallows out. Now, the question is this mandatory or optional? It's perfectly optional. This is just the way you swing. Now, to do that, I want to show you, your body has to accommodate that. So in back swing position. Now, if he's going to go from the turn shoulder plane to the elbow plane here, and he gets his elbow down, notice how much the right shoulder goes down. Now, for the right shoulder to go down, do it from the face-on position. Two phenomena have to occur. The one is, as your pelvis moves, look at the belt buckle move to the target. You do a certain amount of slide because you're having a certain amount of rotation. This
you have more secondary axis tilt. Secondary axis tilt is the degree of spinal tilt gets greater. Also notice that Jim is arching down like that. And that's called right lateral bend. So if you look at his spine, it's not only got secondary axis tilt, it's got right lateral bend. And that allows your right shoulder to come more down. Because if you want to do a stone skipping action down like that, that allows it to happen, right? See how he's doing it? And that's very comfortable for him. Now, I can't do that. So here I am. Notice I'm going to try and skip stones, but because I have such a rigid spine, I cannot get that right lateral bend. And another point, to get right lateral bend, two things have to happen. Not only do you have to bend your spine, but your pelvis has to get ahead of your upper body. See, the pelvis is more open than his upper body to do that. I can't get my pelvis to go ahead of my upper body because the moment I turn my pelvis, this goes ahead. So that's a limiting factor. So when I come down in my own swing, I can't get my hands down there. So I come down and I sweep the plane. So if you look at me from down the line, there, my hand backswing. Notice what's happening. See how I'm coming a bit over the top as I turn my pelvis? Notice that the shaft is coming down the turned shoulder plane. It's not shifting planes to a shallower plane like this. See? I can do it with my arms, but the moment I do it with my swing, you see how it comes. Now, that's perfectly simple. You can come down the turned shoulder plane without shallowing the club shaft. And the golfer who does that, in particular with his driver's swing, is Phil Mickelson. He doesn't shift planes. So if you look at Phil Mickelson, could you maybe mimic his swing for me? We'll do a down the line view. The one characteristic about Phil Mickelson's swing is he stands more erect at rest. Right? He doesn't have as much spinal bend, so he goes up. Then in the downswing, as he turns, he doesn't actively adduct this arm, and the shoulder stays pretty high. Now watch what effect that will have. Notice that the club shaft now is coming down the turned shoulder plane. There. And then it releases, staying on the turned shoulder plane there, like that, on that plane. And notice, come to impact, notice at impact, Phil Mickelson is pretty square with his shoulders. And his right shoulder is still high. And his right elbow, if you look at it at impact, is higher there compared to your normal swing. Go to your normal swing. See how much lower he is. You can see him there. So you have these options. You have to decide, do you want to go from the turned shoulder plane down to a lower plane like Ben Hogan or Dustin Johnson or Hunter Mahan or Keegan Bradley? They all have that look, right? So from their position, they all come in like that, really low, right? Or you could come down the turned shoulder plane, right? Like Phil Mickelson and many other golfers, particularly the long drive competitors. Long drive competitors do not shift planes. They come, let's go to your index swing. Long drive competitors, because they've got this club shaft all the way back there, they don't shift planes. From that position, the club shaft comes all the way down the turned shoulder plane to impact, without shallowing out, and they get the fastest speed that way. Now, you would say, if they get the fastest speed, why would you want to shallow it? And it's very complicated, but some human beings feel that they have more control on a shallower plane into impact, and you have chosen that, right? So it depends on your biomechanics, and the use of both acceptable. Now, the question is, can you maintain an intact flying wedge on a shallow plane? And in reality, you can't. So let's demonstrate that point. So get your index swing position. So this is the flying wedge. The club shaft's in line with his arm. Now, explain it this way. If you do like Phil Mickelson, come down the turn shoulder plane, see the flying wedge is intact because the radial bone on your right lead forearms in line with your antecubital fossa, the whole downswing, because you're coming down the turn shoulder plane. If, however, you do your normal swing now, if you're coming down like this, then your left forearm is pronated, so the radial bone is rotated clockwise. It's more pronated relative to his antecubital fossa. So the flying wedge is not intact. However, this is intact. Notice he still has a geometrically flat left wrist. So the club shaft is still in line with his forearm. Right? So the club face, you see the club face there is in line with the geometrically flat wrist and his watch face. However, the left arm flying wedge should really be with a whole arm there. Can you see the difference between these two angles? So it's perfectly acceptable to have an intact left forearm flying wedge without an intact left arm flying wedge during that phase in your mid downswing. If you choose to shallow the club shaft like Sergio Garcia shallows it out, Dustin Johnson, perfectly acceptable. You just choose. But you must at least, if you hold that, have a left forearm flying wedge, right? You never allow your left wrist to bend and disrupt it, right? Like that. The left forearm flying wedge must maintain intact. Now, by impact, like that, and you come rotated and squared it, they will both be in line again. But there might be a period in your mid downswing when you have an intact left forearm flying wedge, but not an intact left arm flying wedge, perfectly acceptable. Now we're going to move on to the next phase of the swing. So you have this concept, you release power accumulator number 4, then 2 releases. Then from here, we're going to solve a problem. We know that my watch face at impact has to face the target, right? And because if you have an intact flying wedge, the club face is always in line with the watch face. Thank you. See, club face is always in line with the watch face. And as I rotate, you notice clubs releasing intact, no bending of the wrist, and if power accumulator number 2 releases, it'll catch up to my left arm. While that is happening, I'm going to be rotating it to catch up with the left arm. And what I'm going to describe in the next phase of the swing is what happens in this zone from here, P5.5 to P6.2. The feeling, as I said, is you feel like you turn in a corner. And the question is, what do you do to turn this corner? And I will compare my teaching to those of other golf instructors. And the final thing we need to discuss is how do you actually square the face? And I said to you, in the backswing, you pronate your forearm to get it onto the inclined plane. And in the downswing, you have to reverse it, which means you have to supinate the left forearm to square the face. But the question is, how do you do it? What force do you use to supinate it, and when should you supinate it? Should it be here, there, or closer to impact? And I'm going to discuss those issues in great detail.